was the evening of a particularly intense day of teaching. Jesus had been traveling with his disciples from the countryside to the towns, speaking to large crowds about the kingdom of God. The people gathered wherever Jesus went, by the hundreds, sometimes even by the thousands, many of them carrying the weight of their suffering, poverty, and disease. Everywhere they went, the crowd pressed in closer, bringing the sick to be healed, asking for signs and pleading for miracles. The disciples were overwhelmed, doing their best to help Jesus manage the throngs of people. They tried to organize, keep order, and handle the chaos, but by the end of the day the disciples were as drained as they had ever been. James, the son of Zebedee, had barely slept the previous night, kept awake by the worries of tomorrow's journey. John had been fasting for days and felt weak, though he did not wish to complain. Simon Peter was always driven by his passionate zeal but felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him like a heavy burden. Even as they moved from place to place, thoughts of inadequacy, fear of failure, and exhaustion clouded their spirits. There were so many who needed help. How could they do enough? How could they possibly meet all these demands? Jesus, of course, knew what was happening in their hearts. He had seen the same pattern in them before, working and striving but growing increasingly anxious and burned out. He had not yet said anything to them, for the lesson they needed was one they weren't yet ready to hear. Finally, after a day full of miracles, teachings, and crowds that had not lessened even as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Jesus told his disciples that they would stop for the night near the shores of the Sea of Galilee. The hills that surrounded the sea offered some quiet respite. The ground was soft with wild grass, and the gentle sound of the waves rolling in would soon bring peace to their weary hearts. But before rest could come, Jesus knew he needed to teach them something important, a wisdom that would save their spirits from collapse in the days to come. The disciples gathered around a fire that crackled warmly in the center of their small camp. Some had already removed their sandals and were reclining on the ground, trying to massage the soreness from their tired feet. The warm breeze of the evening swirled around them, carrying with it the scents of earth and water, calming their minds. After a while, Peter, his brow furrowed with worry, spoke first. "Master," he said, leaning forward toward Jesus, "the crowds, they are never ending. There are always more people, more sick, more in need, more who cry out for your word. We are trying, but sometimes it feels like we are falling behind. How can we continue like this? How can we keep up when the world's needs are so great?" The others nodded in agreement. Even though they trusted Jesus deeply, they were human, and their spirits were bending under the weight of their tasks. They looked to their teacher for answers, for he always had the right words when their hearts were heavy. Jesus, sensing their weariness and their desire to do good, smiled gently. "You have worked hard today, and I know your hearts are in the right place," he said, his voice filled with understanding. "But there is something you must learn, something that goes beyond the work you do for others. It's about the care you must show for yourselves and the trust you must place in the Father." As he often did when a deep truth needed to be revealed, Jesus began to tell them a story. "There was once a village in the hills, far from here," he said, leaning in toward the fire, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "In that village lived a farmer, a man known throughout the land for his dedication to his fields. Every day, as soon as the first rays of light pierced the horizon, the farmer rose from his bed and went to work. He tilled the soil, planted seeds, watered the crops, and weeded the fields. From morning until night, he worked tirelessly. The disciples were quiet, already sensing the truth in the story that Jesus was telling. The farmer believed, Jesus continued, that if he worked harder, his crops would grow better, his harvest would be more abundant, and his family would be provided for. But he also feared the opposite, that if he did not work hard enough, everything would fall apart. The rains might not come, the crops might wither, or the weeds might overtake the fields. He lived in fear of losing all that he worked for, so he pushed himself harder and harder. Even at night he could not rest. John, who had been silently contemplating the story, spoke up softly. "But Lord, wasn't the farmer doing what he had to do? Didn't he need to work to ensure his family had food? Jesus nodded, acknowledging the concern. Yes, John. He was doing what he believed was necessary. But in his worry, the farmer forgot the rhythm of life that the Father has woven into creation. There is a time for work, yes, but there is also a time for rest. The farmer, however, was so caught up in his fear and need to control everything that he would rise in the middle of the night and return to the fields. He could not bear to leave them unwatched. He believed that his work alone would secure the harvest. As Jesus spoke, the disciples began to see themselves in the story. They too had been caught in the fear that their work, though it was good and necessary, depended entirely on their own strength. They, like the farmer, had started to forget the simple truth that God was the one who sustained all things. The farmer's neighbors saw what he was doing. Jesus went on, and they warned him. "Rest, friend," they said, "for your body is weary. You are working yourself into the ground, and soon, you will have no strength left to tend your fields." But the farmer did not listen. He believed that if he stopped, everything would fall apart. His heart was filled with fear, not trust. Jesus paused for a moment, watching the faces of his disciples as they processed his words. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows that danced across their tired faces. The weight of the day was still heavy on them, but now something deeper was stirring in their hearts. Finally, Jesus continued. One day, after many months of working without rest, the farmer collapsed. He had pushed his body too far. Lying on the ground beside his fields, he was too weak to rise. His hands, once strong and capable, now trembled with exhaustion. As he lay there, unable to move, he fell into a deep sleep. Andrew, who had been listening intently, whispered, "What happened then, Lord?" In his sleep, Jesus said, the farmer had a dream. In this dream he found himself standing in a vast, beautiful field. The crops were tall and golden, swaying gently in the wind. The earth beneath his feet was rich and full of life. It was the most bountiful harvest he had ever seen, far greater than anything he could have imagined. In the middle of the field, the farmer saw an old man with kind eyes and a wise face. The disciples leaned in closer, their weariness temporarily forgotten as they were drawn into the story. The old man looked at the farmer with compassion. Jesus said, his voice soft but full of meaning, and asked him, "Why do you work so hard, my son? Why do you toil without rest?" The farmer, confused, replied, "I work because I must. If I do not, my crops will fail and my family will go hungry." The old man smiled gently and said, "Do you not see? The earth works while you sleep. The seeds grow in silence, nourished by the soil and the rain, without your hand guiding them. The sun rises and sets without your command, and the rain falls in its season. Your task is to tend the fields during the day, but you must also rest when the night comes. It is in the rest that the true growth happens." The disciples were silent, the weight of the story sinking into their hearts. They understood that the farmer's story was not just about crops, but about them. They had been pushing themselves, believing that everything depended on their effort, but forgetting to trust in God's provision. The farmer awoke, Jesus said, and with tears in his eyes, he realized how blind he had been. In his fear and his need to control everything, he had forgotten to trust in the process that the Creator had set in motion. The earth, the rain, the sun, they all worked without his constant intervention. From that day forward, the farmer learned to balance his work with rest. He rose with the sun and worked diligently, but when the day ended, he trusted that the earth would continue its work as he slept. Jesus paused, allowing the story to settle. The disciples, their hearts full of understanding, realized that they too had forgotten to trust. They had been working without rest, believing that everything depended on their constant effort, but they had not been relying on God. Finally, Jesus spoke again, his voice filled with love and wisdom. "My friends, your bodies are weary, but so are your spirits. The Father has designed the night for rest, just as he has designed the day for work. When you deprive yourselves of sleep, you deprive your souls of the renewal they need. Sleep is not a waste of time, It is a gift from God, a time when your mind is restored and your heart finds peace. It is in sleep that you find the strength to continue the journey, the wisdom to make right decisions, and the peace to trust in God's provision. The disciples sat in silence, reflecting on the story and on their own lives. They realized that in their desire to serve, they had been neglecting their own need for rest. They had been trying to control everything, forgetting that God was the one who held all things in his hands. "Remember this," Jesus said softly, "even I, the Son of Man, take time to rest. For it is in rest that I hear the Father's voice most clearly. Do not neglect this gift, for in sleep, you will find the peace you seek and the strength you need." The disciples nodded, their hearts full of understanding. That night, as they lay beneath the stars, they embraced the wisdom of Jesus' words. They realized that sleep was not a weakness, but a divine gift, a time when they could trust in God's care. And as they closed their eyes, they knew that when the morning came, they would rise with new strength, ready to continue their journey with Jesus, knowing that God was with them, even in the stillness of sleep. From that night on, the disciples learned the importance of rest, understanding that good sleep was not just a physical necessity but a spiritual act of trust. They no longer feared the night, for they knew that in the quiet of sleep, God was at work, renewing their bodies, minds, and souls for the days ahead. This is end of the story. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.